Welcome back to Proof of DeSci, the podcast where we dive deep into the projects, people, and protocols building the future of decentralized science. In today's episode, we're joined by two rising stars in the biotech space, Caroline and Eshwar, who are the winners of the Phlo Hackathon with their innovative idea, Pearlfect Millet. We're also joined by Morgan Richards, who's the co-founder of ValiDAO and a person responsible for Phlo and the product side here at ValiDAO. We're going to explore Caroline and Eshwar's journey from idea to research, how they leveraged Phlo to accelerate their research, and their perspective on the evolving role of AI in science as well. Whether you're a student, a founder, just curious about where DeSci is headed, this is a must listen. I'm Tom, and let's get into it, guys. So maybe we can start with some intros. Caroline and Eshwar, if you could tell us each a bit about your background, academic or maybe professional, and what led you to the world of biotech.
Definitely, I can start. So we're both rising freshmen at Cornell University studying plant science and information science. And what really led me to biotechnology was I used to intern at the USAID Research Lab for Horticulture at UC Davis in the United States. And then I'm also just doing a lot of research with the Boyce Thompson Institute, which is our plant science research institute at Cornell University, which has been really great.
Yeah. And I'll say that for me personally, maybe not biotech. That wasn't my start initially. I just was really into agriculture because my grandfather's a farmer and he's a researcher. So I kind of got into that world. And then I worked for a startup in my junior year of high school at an ag tech startup in St. Louis. And that really ignited a passion in startups, especially in biotech. And then at school, as Caroline mentioned, we're both plant science majors, and I've also worked for a lab, but I think what made me really interested in something like startups and pitches is working in a VC club, doing projects with VC, and just learning more about that world.
That's incredible. Thank you guys so much for this intro. Again, just FYI, obviously, whenever you want to jump in, if you've got any additional questions, you obviously know Caroline and Eshwar a bit better than I do. So yeah, feel free to jump on whenever you want to. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the beginning of the hackathon and the story behind it for you guys. What inspired you to participate in the Phlo Hackathon? How did you actually find it? And how did the idea for the Pearlfect Millet came about?
Yeah, so I can start this off. At Cornell, we have something called eShip, and it's an email list that like alumni, students all send so that they can just send emails into. And this usually is like startup ideas, co-founders, internships. But a man by the name of Lewis actually sent in that email list about this startup. He was talking about ValiDAO, and I don't know, the idea of this hackathon sounded really cool and really poignant to things me and Caroline have talked about in our academic careers, talking about underutilized crops. And we also really enjoy businesses, pitching. That is something we both love. So I forwarded this email to Caroline, and literally within like 2 minutes, she responded and she was like, I'm so down to do this. And for the idea, again, as I said, my grandfather, he was a farmer in India, and he would talk to me a lot about the changes in the Indian diet, especially after something like the Green Revolution. And actually, my first introduction into agriculture was about the fallouts of the Green Revolution. One of those was crops becoming underutilized because high yield crops, decrease biodiversity. And one of those major crops in India was millet. And I've talked to a lot of farmers in India, and they talk about anemia and that kind of correlating with the decrease of millet in their diet. So that's kind of how the idea got started. And then Caroline's really into research, and she was able to really get the scientific part of this project going.
That is...
Oh, Tom, just
Go ahead,
before we jump into like the more details on the project itself, how did you guys meet, and like what was the alignment there? Because it sounds like you guys have worked together on a few things before.
Yeah, definitely. Funny, we just met at Cornell. We ran into each other as plant science majors. A lot of our classes are really concentrated, and they give us the opportunities to be in smaller groups. And it just so happened we ended up being in every single same small group, same class. We ended up working in the same lab for a little bit, and it just ended up working out really well because even during this project, we were able to see our chemistry and collaboration, and we were able to line up our ideas. So we're very thankful for the opportunities we've had.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic, guys. And again, huge congratulations on not just winning, but also, taking the lead and actually participating in the hackathon. I remember that on the Zoom call, on the demo call, you actually said that you're probably you're probably the youngest people here, and you feel like you're a bit out of your depth. But in my personal opinion, after speaking with Morgan as well, you guys really stood out. So, it's incredible what you do. Can you tell us a little bit more? Can you walk us through what Pearlfect Millet actually aims to solve, and why this subject and actually focusing on this topic matters?
Okay, yeah, I can. I'd say for GM crops, a lot of it is high yield, and again, that is the focus of Proof Millet, high yield, so it's more profitable for farmers. But that idea is still very basic. What made the idea so attractive, it's so interesting, is that it's also helping to solve a public health issue, which is anemia, because millet, specifically pearl millet, has a lot of iron, and it's something that's already deeply ingrained in Indian cuisine. It's just not as consumed because it's not as profitable for farmers to raise and produce. So I guess that's my favorite part of it, that it actually, instead of just making it profitable for farmers, which grows are extremely important, it also helps the community and helps all of India solving an issue that's quite frankly been around for decades and nothing has been done about it, which is why we've seen the Indian government also aligning with the same idea that we have in our project, as they're starting new initiatives towards it. But this is our way of trying to contribute to this idea, because this is what we know. GM, crop science, that is our thing. So we love it.
Maybe for the noobs out, could you just give a bit of an explanation about what millet is as a crop and how it's traditionally used in Indian cuisine?
Yeah, so it's a type of cereal, and they use it in dishes. They usually grind it up and use it as more of a flour. So there's dishes like dosa, which is very popular in the southern part of India, which is it's essentially an Indian crepe. That's the best way I could explain it. And yeah, that's a dish I grew up eating all of my childhood. And there's other dishes like that, such as upma, which is kind of like a softer rice. It's like a porridge kind of. So there's a lot of dishes like that traditionally use millet, but now they use other grain, cereals, or legumes because it's not grown quite as often.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, it's just nice to put it into perspective, because I think a lot of us, at least I probably never encountered millet in my diet yet. So.
Yeah, and I think, because I was doing a little bit of my research as well on the pearl millet, and why suddenly, a few years back, people stopped producing that and actually focusing on putting that in a diet, not just in India, but even in Europe. And what I wanted to ask you guys is, what's unique, or do you think the most challenging about millet as a biotech focus?
Yeah, so there's definitely been a few challenges that we found when using both Phlo and our personal research. And some of that is it does take a while for millet to grow. There's certain conditions that have to be met, as with any crop. But in the way that practices and farming, specifically in India, work, it just tends to be extremely high labor, high cost, and there's not a lot of profitability in that area. But we were able to kind of utilize previous research in other types of cereal grains and millets, and thankfully that's already been done. And I think that because they've made progress in similar grains, that we were able to, and many others were able to, start doing more research on pearl millet.
Okay, understood. And Morgan, do you have any other questions regarding the research project itself, before we move on to the Phlo integration in this hackathon?
I guess one thing, maybe more broadly speaking, that I was interested in, is this something that you guys are considering working on outside of the hackathon and taking forwards? Is there any extended opportunities or initiatives for you guys, or does it kind of stop with this hackathon?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. For me personally, I currently work in a tomato lab. I'm really into doing plant genetics and genetic modifications, especially for the benefit of nutrition security and for farmer profitability. And although right now as a sophomore, a rising sophomore in college, I might not have the time. I think that this was kind of like a great seed for us to plant. There's so much information online and that we're learning still that we can utilize. And I think this would be such like an interesting project. I can even see myself bringing this sort of research to Cornell or to a lab that works with similar grains, just because I think this really straightforwardly addressed such a large issue.
Yeah, and if I'd like to add on to it, I think what really interests me about this project and is thinking of it from our own perspective is that there's usually a really big divide between research, success, and innovation compared to commercial rollout. And that's because traditional VC funding is extremely complicated, extremely hard, and needs a lot of capital. So I think, to me personally, it's really cool that we got to do it in the context of Valley DAO, the decentralized science, because I could see how this project would gain some benefits from that type of philosophy rather than traditional VC funding.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. I think, one of the things I liked most about this project is how kind of expansive and holistically you looked at the entire problem and didn't just talk about, I think it's very common for people, especially on the deep tech side, to be thinking about a problem with like blinkers on and be looking at it as like a technological problem to solve. But you also considered some of the cultural aspects, some of the scale up and commercialization issues, some of the regulatory concerns. And yeah, I just thought that was super neat how you integrated that. So maybe you could, for the listeners that are less familiar with your project, maybe you could just go into a little bit more detail on those aspects of the project and how that kind of made it, how you were thinking differently about this particular technology.
Yeah, definitely. Well, as we're both plant science majors, we're very familiar with sort of the regulatory side and the public perception of GM crops. And we thought that that would be something that's really important to address, especially just taking into consideration that many people around the world are very hesitant to accept this sort of technology. And especially with regulations on these, there can be stricter and it varies greatly depending on the region. And even within countries, I know in the United States, we have a wide acceptance of GM crops in sort of the Midwest, but on the West Coast where I'm from, we tend to not really implement those sort of technologies, despite how incredibly helpful that I find they could be. So I think that part of this was just trying to address this issue from all aspects and all viewpoints to make sure that we covered all of our bases in terms of making this a realistic project.
Yeah, and going into I guess some of the less hardcore financing or tech things that we did include, such as cultural knowledge about this crop, it was really important to us that even though this is just a pitch deck at this moment, that it could be somewhat, realistic, because there are many times in history where agriculture has been used for the good of the people, but a lot of times it caused, such as wheat in Japan and Korea, that when those were implemented and the U.S. Army gave them a lot of grain and wheat, they did not know how to use them. And even though that Japan and Korea both developed methods to use it eventually, having their own type of bread, there's still some cultural disconnect, which probably undermines some of the efforts made by the U.S. government to help the people there. That's one historical example I really had in my head when thinking of what to implement in my home country. And I know Caroline can talk about more about the regulations just because she's better at that than I am.
Yeah, if you guys have any other questions about what we use to find these resources, just ask away.
Yeah, I think I always try and assume that the people listening maybe don't have so much perspective on the regulations. So what are the types of things that people need to think about when producing a GM crop? As you said, in the US, there are many places in which they're accepted. So what do those regulations look like in the US and maybe overseas? And, what preparations are required for people that are developing new technologies to consider even before they start actually developing the tech?
Definitely. I think one thing that we had to take into consideration is that regulations differ greatly based on whether this crop is going to be used for human consumption or for sort of biofuels, feedstock, not really into that whole consumer market on our end. But some things that are kind of all around considered in all governments and all sort of regulations is that the genome of the genetically modified plant has to be consistent. And so this is why development times of GM crops might take so long, because you typically have to test these for about 2 to 3 growing seasons, which for millet varies between like around 40 to 90 days. And this can be really time consuming, and especially if there tends to be an error, we can't control the weather or the sort of environment that it's in. And so being able to see consistency over different generations is extremely important, especially if you start to sort of produce this widespread. And another thing that not many people are really aware of is that there's transgressions through molecular characterization, which is kind of just contamination from the genome. If this is a new plant, if this is in a different environment, there might be unexpected outcomes in the environment. Does it ruin the soil? How is the nitrogen uptake? Is this going to affect the water flow, the animals, and just the ecosystem surrounding this crop? So there's a lot of kind of trials that governments and regulatory practices like to see before they really implement this, just because if you don't go through this thoroughly enough, then there can be severe consequences. And that's actually just something really important that I'm not sure many people are super aware of.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, again, like, I think what really helped me believe that this project is realistic, even somewhat, is that India recently implemented some new GM rice. And we talk often about the stigma, but I think it's really, encouraging that path has already been followed by others. And while those GM crops probably had a much easier time going through the process as they came from major institutes of research, it gives hope that maybe in the future we can see more GM crops, maybe created by smaller startups, to come in and play with the big boys in India.
Absolutely. And maybe just one final question on the tech side. Where do you start when you're tackling a problem such as this? Like, did you come up with the problem statement first, or was it the technology first? And then, like, once you've decided on that, what are the first steps that you typically take as a plant scientist?
So I think that since we're both plant scientists, and we both are very into science, but we also have a great love for business, which means we have a great love for ideas and problems. So it always starts at the problem first, because me personally, I think if you develop a technology before you think of the problem, it can often go into different paths that are unintended and honestly just not efficient. So it definitely started first with researching like what crops used to be in a food system like India, what were the problems we needed to solve. And then Caroline really got into the beginning of the tech, if she'd like to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I'll jump in here, especially when working with GM crops and sort of looking to the breeding and genetic modifications. The things that I like to do first is see if there's any previous research. And for us, we were able to find that foxtail millet has already been done a little bit more research than on pearl millet, and we can really utilize those genomes if there's any previous analysis to see if there's certain characteristics that we can enhance. And then there's also the sort of looking to results of research and just doing a really in-depth dive of understanding the progress that's been made and whether or not we need to account for that sort of timeline in which we take more time or less time depending on our resources available. But really, like, it gets down to all of the chromosomes and bins and every single small little variable that's inherited from basically breeding wild type and domesticated crops. And you can really just see that through the entire plant genome if you're able to find it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, guys. Yeah, Tom, I'm done derailing your script.
No worries, absolutely not a problem. Okay, guys, I wanted to move a little bit more behind the scenes and how you've been building your hackathon entry. What did your workflow look like during the hackathon process?
Yeah, definitely. So as Eshwar mentioned previously, he sent me this email. I immediately responded. And as soon as I did, we just started bouncing ideas off of each other. I really love that he was able to draw sort of this project just from like his cultural experiences and his history. And we were able to, I feel like, very quickly figure out what issue we wanted to address, especially considering just the insecurity in which we utilize so few of the consumable crops that we have available. And so in order to dive into this and get started, we really just started doing a little bit of outside research, sort of on regulatory practices, previous research as mentioned before, and also sort of like who our investors would be to see if this would be a realistic project. And then we sort of jumped into Phlo, and I'm sure we'll get into that later, but we were able to really utilize Phlo to kind of give us a deeper background knowledge and use that to pull our project together.
Yeah, what I'll add about Phlo with is that Phlo really supercharged the process of the idea generation and all the little things that become extremely arduous in other pitches. I think that's the real beauty of Phlo, because obviously Phlo is AI generation, so it might not be perfect, but it gets you through a lot of stages that I think that if we were actually trying to develop this project by ourselves and get through each stage that Phlo did for us, maybe we would have given up because it would have been so arduous and just long.
Absolutely, thank you. And we're going to dive into Phlo in just a moment, because we definitely want to pick your brains a bit about the features and how you found working with Phlo. But just before that, were there any kind of unexpected strategic challenges? Maybe from the initial research idea, you came across some data or any challenges that you had to overcome? And if yes, how did you do it?
Yeah, well, I think especially since I talked about the genome earlier, I think that just because we have the resources offered to us by Cornell University, it might have been a little bit easier for us as individuals to find the research and sort of all of that data we needed, especially when it comes to previous research on foxtail millet or other cereal grains that are closely related to pearl millet. And I'm not sure like if realistically other people would have had those opportunities to look through those resources. The other thing is we weren't really able to find a complete genome for pearl millet or foxtail millet. I'm not sure if that's out there published. And of course, there are a lot of research papers that have been done, and we were trying to go through that. But, there's some inconsistencies as research in millets is sort of new and upcoming. But that was just something that we also felt Phlo really helped us with.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's talk. Thank you so much. And let's talk a little bit about Phlo. So how much did Phlo play a role in your project, in the research and the idea? Which tools or features were the most useful?
Yeah, definitely. I did the majority of the tech development on Phlo. And when I first opened this and I saw how detailed you needed to be, I was so intrigued by this. I feel like a lot of the times AI prompts are just used for kind of idea generation and sort of lets you take things into your own hand, versus with the utilization of Phlo and the user like compatibility, I went through every single step, and even multiple times as we ran through 3 different projects on Phlo. And it was so interesting for me just because I could be so specific in what I needed from this technology, from this AI model, what I was looking for, that perhaps you definitely would not be able to do this on a regular search engine or even through a single AI model. And that really helped us to develop sort of the science, get all of the background information we needed without having to comb through a tedious amount of research papers, articles, and sort of going really, really deep diving into that, which is extremely time consuming, which is why I personally thought that Phlo was a great tool.
Yeah, and I'll talk about the business development that I think that I was very impressed just how specific and how poignant that a lot of the generation was. I was especially impressed by the customer persona. I hadn't even thought that AI can make something so specific down to down to the customer persona's personality type and motivations, pain points, watering holes, buying cycles. I thought that was really cool and just so in depth.
No, this is really nice to hear, because this is exactly the kind of design philosophy behind Phlo, is that a lot of us in Valley DAO and DeSci and just in general in science are very comfortable using the latest and greatest AI models, but they all have their shortcomings. And what we kind of discovered, especially me working with it myself in my own workflows, was like it becomes infinitely more useful when you can daisy chain different tasks, like different discrete tasks together. So instead of just saying, generate me a customer persona and you giving it a bunch of information, it's like, okay, can I give it a bunch of information and then get it to do a customer persona? Can I use that same information to then do a sales strategy and like all of these different tasks, which are unique and require different questions, different answers, different sets of expertise. But when you can really chain it all together, you're able to do something very big from something that started off pretty small. And I
Yes.
think
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. That's where we wanted Phlo to go, and it's reassuring to hear that it's having some success in that.
It's very reminiscent of having like almost a consultant on our team. Like that's what it feels like when I see the customer persona, competitor analysis. It feels like something from one of the consulting clubs back at school, or something some McKinsey consultant would tell some startup. So that was really interesting to see.
Well, if we can put them out of business, that's mission accomplished.
Fantastic. I believe you guys, we're living in this kind of age that we use AI tools on a daily basis pretty much at work, uni, just real life. And if you guys used AI tools in your studies or research before, what do you think is different compared to Phlo?
Yeah, definitely. I do research in a tomato lab at Cornell, and oftentimes we work with a lot of coding and trying to find a lot of background information. But like I said, combing through all of those papers is extremely tedious, and we're even encouraged to try to utilize AI models to find background information to kind of support our theses and our theories. And I just found that with Phlo, it was a lot kind of easier to give a straightforward sort of what exactly am I looking for. And then there was also the option to go back in while you're still doing the tech development to kind of rectify certain strayaways just so that you can stay on one singular path. And I found that even when I'm doing research on different AI models, they're not always able to keep the idea the same as when you initially input it. And that could also just be because of the massive amounts of data on the internet. But I thought that Phlo really was able to utilize all of that and all of the input that we put in to give us a direct answer.
Amazing, thank you. And do you think, moving forward, do you think Phlo could become a standard in academic or early stage biotech work? Do you think there's potential for AI tools like that? That, what you said about Phlo becoming this kind of like, it felt like more of a consultant in your team?
Yeah, no, I could definitely see why, because I feel like just being a founder it's very convoluted, and a lot of, especially if you aren't in an environment with a lot of founders like we are at school, it's really daunting to even approach these issues, and going through minor hurdles that Phlo just steamrolls through the tech development and the business development it's really incredible. And I could see that empowering or just giving confidence to a lot of prospective founders. So I could imagine this, obviously more refined, but eventually becoming a tool that many founders that may not have the background originally to use and hopefully turn into something real.
And to add on to that, I think that just in the technology development, it was really helpful just to see the way that Phlo kind of outputs all of our information was so centered around sort of a startup. It gives you the background, your competitor analysis, and sort of just like what other research people have been doing and the progress that's been made. And it gives you this Phlo diagram, which we also found really interesting and helpful. And I'm not sure if this would be as helpful in sort of a very research-focused environment, but I think in terms of combining STEM, if you're doing sort of a VC looking for investors, trying to find an idea that people can fund, that this was a great tool, especially combining all of the science and business sides.
Yeah, I imagine that a founder who's very STEM heavy, as many of them are, would really benefit from the business development. Obviously, AI model could, well, at least for now, we never know, but can be a standalone. But I think that having a business development model, especially if you don't come from a business background, would be really helpful to a lot of future founders.
Yeah, and I would say like the same exact thing for the tech development and people who have more experience in VC or business development.
Yeah, I sort of quipped earlier about putting McKinsey consultants out of business. Obviously, that was a joke. But I think this is something that's really important to point out is that, AI, in many ways, it does pose a bit of an existential risk, not necessarily that it's going to take over and destroy the world, but that it is a very real possibility that it puts people out of jobs, or it displaces people and forces them to learn new skills or upskill themselves or go into different specializations. And these are genuine things that we have to start thinking about, especially when, us from our side, when we're building AI tools. We don't want to destroy the entire scientific ecosystem or the startup ecosystem. They're things that in many ways have functioned pretty well already, and we want to build something that doesn't replace them entirely, but is something that just augments and supercharges what is already possible with one or two or a small team of people. And so, this is a kind of another big guiding principle for us, is building something that just feels like an extension of the researcher or of the startup founders, instead of feeling like it's doing all of the work for them and they're just taking a back seat.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think Morgan's obviously the brains behind Phlo, and Phlo is basically his baby. So Morgan obviously knows this market best. But I do feel, from an outsider kind of point of view, I do think that Phlo is here to make the whole process for students, for researchers, for scientists much more efficient and easier in the long run. And when it comes down to efficiency, I've got a question to you, Caroline and Eshwar. What kind of features you'd love to see added to Phlo? This could be any features or support that would take it to the next level.
Yeah. So in terms of funding, I think while grants is really good, grants, even though we are talking about decentralized science, I think that Phlo should be able to use for everybody. So I'd love to see, instead of just funding opportunities, I'd love to see VC opportunities. I know that's my world, but that's something I'd really enjoy just for any startup, because not everybody quite has the business model for a crowd-funded startup. So that's one thing I'd love to see. Otherwise, I think Phlo is extremely extensive, which is really admirable.
Yeah, I really think that Phlo's been so helpful. And I will say that just because from a science perspective, most times ideas for sort of startups comes from an initial paper or an initial source. And I think that one aspect that might be really helpful is being able to input those sources of your own and kind of have Phlo integrate that into the resources it finds, just because I feel like that can also help guide the model in a way towards that direct idea that you're kind of having, while it also pulls incredible resources that I found so immensely helpful. It would have also been really nice just to be able to kind of input a little bit more, I guess, sort of like that user component. But I really just thought that all the resources that Phlo found were extremely credible and so efficiently found as well, that it was so useful.
Really great to hear. Just to dig deeper on that one, maybe. How would that submission of information look like for you? Because I think there's a number of different ways you could do it. There's the obvious one, which is just dump a bunch of papers or PDFs. You could instead obviously give the DOIs or URLs. Maybe you could link it to another platform or account that you use that has already some of your research history or your research interests. Yeah, just to find out more, what could that look like for you guys, and what would make most sense?
No, yeah, definitely. I think that's a great question. I mean, for me, when I was doing this, I obviously had almost no background in the millet world. I went online, I went on Google Scholar and found a few articles. And I think that this sort of URL idea might just be really user-friendly in the sense that it's not super complicated, especially during the research section where the Phlo really starts to pull all the sources and gives you those sort of PDFs and models and explanations of everything. Being able to kind of add on to that a little bit might be really helpful. But also your idea about connecting it to sort of a portfolio or a platform where you've already established your needs and goals might be really useful for researchers who already have background and credibility. And it can also help for Phlo I feel as though Phlo really went through a lot of the jargon that we typically find in scientific papers that people aren't able to understand. But if it can kind of sort of recognize the language of someone who's published maybe 10 papers, they might be able to give a more in-depth Phlo. But I really just think that everything Phlo provided was already so helpful. That would just be one thing that could make it even better.
Nice. And maybe what are some of the tools and platforms that you guys are using at the moment that are kind of centered around your research interests or your work at uni?
Yeah, I find myself Typically just using Google Scholar or a lot of the resources they provide to us at Cornell University. And I find that just sort of the way that all models collect data, it kind of caters more to what has she been looking at more recently, what sort of data, what sort of plants. But that, of course, is a huge, huge network of resources and data collection.
Yeah, and looking at the business side, I love PitchBook. I think PitchBook is my favorite website of all time. So that's kind of my world. So I love looking at all the deals and kind of what VCs are looking for. And yeah, that also probably the most major tool I use outside of Phlo for this project.
Nice. It's actually super interesting because we did have a couple of conversations with PitchBook looking to integrate some of their data resources. Unfortunately, PitchBook has a bit of a closed business model in that we can license the data for ourselves, but we couldn't share it with users of a platform. And so obviously that doesn't align with our kind of goals on Phlo. So we are now talking to Crunchbase, which is obviously very similar and a lead competitor to PitchBook. So hopefully in the near future, we'll get some of those integrated.
Fantastic. Now, zooming out a little bit away from Phlo and looking at the more kind of broader image of decentralized science. Caroline, Eshwar, what excites you most about DeSci and its role in shaping the future of biotech?
So I'll come at this from an agriculture perspective. VC in agtech honestly has been flopping. Since 2020, after there's a big boom and then a big crash, VCs are just so hard to work with. Talking to founders here in California, near Davis, a major hub of ag tech, it used to be that, these startups would go seek out a VC that fit their own ideas, but now they're just hoping any VC with whatever type of philosophy, good or bad, will come and help them raise a round and raise money. It's seeming that after that big boom and decline, that VCs are way more unruly, have so much more power on these startups since startups don't quite have options like they used to have. So something like decentralized science is very interesting to me just because it gives another way out and kind of flips the power dynamic, which I think is extremely admirable.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I think that especially since a lot of startups will go to universities or private institutions to go through their research, some people just might not have as much access to those resources. That can be extremely hard to attain, and especially that level of trust that you need to build after working with a different organization along with your own can be difficult to maintain. So I just think that making this more decentralized is really helpful to the person who is starting this, and it really gives more of a ownership feel probably to the VC and whatever you end up working on and going through with that.
Amazing. And Morgan, do you have any other questions that you wanted to ask Caroline and Eshwar before I ask my final questions?
Not right now, not off the top of my head. They've been really great at answering all of our questions. Most of the time, I couldn't have put it better myself. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Okay, guys, what advice you'd give to fellow students or researchers that are looking to get involved in hackathons or to build up a research project like this one?
Yeah, I would say that it's really daunting going through this type of process, especially just because I have no coding background. I really am not super in-depth. I don't have that in-depth knowledge of plant genomes like Caroline. So, but I still thought this was really interesting, and there's nothing to lose by doing something like this. It's a net zero if we bomb and fail, but it could only be a positive if we did good. So I would say the first step, that's the most important, just taking the leap. And again, I know that everything's centered around Phlo, but going back to Phlo, it really helped with taking the first step and just having the courage to put your idea out there and trying to make it work.
Yeah, and to add on to what Ishwar said, as it being a net zero, hackathons and utilizing these new technologies, it's really just an opportunity. There's no other resources that we can use. This is such a new innovation that just being able to explore this has been incredible. I think that I even learned so much about the ways that you can use AI models, and that was so incredible. And I know that it seems a little daunting sometimes, especially for us going into this. We were probably the youngest people on that call. We felt a little intimidated, but we talked amongst ourselves and we decided that this is something that not everybody knows about, not everyone gets a chance to do. And considering just how incredibly innovative this technology was, we wanted to take that opportunity. So it really is, as Eshwar said, taking that leap and seizing every opportunity, taking that initiative, because really this just gives you more experience and can make you understand the world that we're living in a little bit better today.
Thanks so much, guys. Just maybe before you ask your last questions, Tom, obviously there's been a lot of positive things said about Phlo, and I don't I don't want to live in a fantasy world where it's all perfect and good. I know I've already read some of your guys' feedback, but just maybe for the people listening that are interested in trying Phlo out in the future, what were some of the limitations and maybe pain points or frustrations, and how can we do things even better?
No, yeah. I mean, obviously Phlo was extremely user-friendly. We were able to produce 3 different projects on this platform. I will say that going through the technology development, and the point when you're going, I'm not sure which stage it was, but when you get all of the research, it kind of gives you these variables in which it's looking for after you input all of your initial feedback into the model. And for me, I found it a little more difficult to navigate because it just seemed to me that Phlo was interpreting this sort of in a different way than I expected. And although it was still able, like I was still able to work with this and it gave so much amazing information, it was difficult for me to kind of go in and fix those little things that I thought would have made a big difference. And even when you exit the technology development after that's all done and you get all of that, those loads of information, there's no way to go back in and edit it. And I'm not sure, I'm not very familiar with coding or AI, so I'm not sure if that's because it might ruin sort of the pathways that Phlo goes through just to produce such a polished outcome. But we did end up having to produce multiple projects simply because we didn't get the results we were expecting. But it was very easy for us to go in and create that project, especially after getting that sort of experience with the way Phlo works. And we were able to get the final outcome we were looking for.
Yeah, and then looking at the business development, again, it's very extensive, but sometimes I feel like the information is so extensive that, and maybe it's just for founders like us, maybe other founders can find this useful, but like knowing like personality type of our customer persona isn't so helpful. But again, more information is never a bad thing. But looking at something like the target market, I'd be interested to see how they make up their market size and their CAGR, because if I would feel more comfortable, honestly, if I were just to be using Phlo to get that from some reputable source. But I don't know, it might be from some reputable source. I would just love to see sourcing on that target market. And also with the budget, I really enjoyed that we were able to pick our cost price or cost-based pricing. I thought the pricing thing was really cool. But in terms of the budget, our budget was very off, as you said, Morgan. That could just be a limitation of the actual AI model, but I think that'd be something interesting to look into. And then my last thing would probably be about the funding. We did try looking into our grants that were recommended to us by Phlo, but for some reason or another, none of these grants recommended, at least the first 3, our startup actually qualified for. So maybe some more diversity in funding opportunities and some more care into the matching would be really nice and appreciated. But again, ending off on a good note, I really loved how thorough the business development was because, again, as I said, more information is never a bad thing.
Awesome. And yeah, just to maybe touch on some of those points. For Caroline, your first point about changing things. Yeah, it is true that this is something that is, given the way that we've designed it, it is a little bit tricky. And so it's taken us a little bit more time than we would have liked to make this more kind of dynamic and editable. Because if just to kind of give some insight under the hood, it's like we start from this starting point and then it really like branches out into all these different components and workflows, and then it's like processing a lot of different things in different ways at different times. And because it's starting from that like one root branch point, we can, for example, we could change one of the branches, but then the problem is you change that one branch and now the entire tree might not make sense together. Just putting it in the most simplistic sense, it's like, if you paint one branch purple and the rest of the tree is green, then something's off. And in terms of the project, that is obviously more significant than color mismatches. It can be things that are like fundamental disagreements with the project itself. And so what we're really trying to figure out is how can we develop a user experience that allows you to catch those contradictions. And this is something that we did have, although I don't think it is working it was working during the hackathon, was a feature that detects contradictions in those branches and is able to go back and correct those and all of the branches that are attached to it, so that it's not just changing one small part, that it's actually changing the entire definition of your project. So that's definitely a challenge, but something we're still very much working on.
Yeah, and I think that everything you've been saying about sort of the correlation between all the branches that Phlo is generating is super important. I think that one of the aspects I really enjoyed about the research part is when it's creating all of those variables and giving you those sort of reports during the research section. You can regenerate these prompts. And of course, it takes a little bit of time, but I really appreciated that, especially because it makes the model sort of look back. I'm not sure how the model works, but it kind of made me feel as though the model was looking back into what I initially inputted, and it gave me a much clearer branching the second time around. And I think that that was a really great aspect of being able to use the research and kind of rework it in a way that may not be as dramatic as us going in and changing one of those branches, as you said, and it makes sure that everything stays cohesive, which I really enjoyed.
Incredible, guys. Thank you so much. And I've got a final question. So if there's anyone in the audience that wants to jump in, if there's anything that you want to ask Caroline, Eshwar, or maybe Morgan, feel free to request to speak and I'll get you here on stage. Caroline, Eshwar, I've got one final question to you guys around your plans, around your dreams in this field in 20, 30, 40 years' time. What one thing you'd love to fix in the world? Where do you see yourself? And if there was absolutely no objects, what would you do to make the world a better place? What would be the kind of the core focus point of your biotech careers?
Yeah, so I'll start. I think the main issue that really spoke to me and made me want to go into agriculture outside of just my grandfather and my just interest is that I'm from St. Louis, which is a city in the middle of the United States. And a major issue we have is food inequity. We have major food deserts and just wealth inequity. And that's one thing. Food systems has been a major passion of mine. So if money wasn't a problem and I could just do whatever I'd like, I think addressing those types of systematic issues within food tech, food systems would be my calling, at least at this moment.
I was going to say something very similar to Ishwar. Growing up in California, there's a lot of farms, a lot of agriculture, but even though all that exists in this state of the United States, I did a lot of volunteering growing up, and I saw a lot of injustices in food insecurity and nutrition insecurity. And I think the biggest part for me pursuing a plant science major has just been, I would really love to help feed more people, create those resources. It's a human right. We all deserve to be nutritionally stable, especially with all of the resources we have and all the food waste that's going on. And I feel like for me, if it was at all possible, the wide acceptance of GM crops, especially for human consumption, especially just being able to get past those hurdles of ensuring safety. And once that barrier is complete, having society accept that, I feel would be just a great step. And I think that that would be my idealistic world in which I'm a researcher, being able to work with that.
That's really why Valley DAO and other communities like this exist, right? It's to empower you guys to do what needs to be done in the world. Yeah, we really hope that you get to live out these dreams.
Yeah, all I've got to say, guys, Caroline, Eshwar, you're an absolute inspiration, and I'm so glad that we got to record this spaces, this podcast episode, and for you guys to somehow obviously join the Valley DAO's ecosystem and winning this hackathon. Yeah. Congratulations one more time. And I think that's a wrap, unless anyone else has got any questions. Morgan, if there's anything else, any final thoughts that you'd like to share or ask Caroline and Eshwar?
No, just want to say thanks again, both of you, for taking part, for pressing us with the pitch, for obviously giving a lot of really valuable feedback on the product, and joining this space.
Yeah, and we just wanted to say thank you for this opportunity. Honestly, for me, my summer's been pretty boring. And when me and Caroline were talking about doing this hackathon, at the very least, we were excited just to have the opportunity and the platform just to think and to show our idea to the world and to other fellow researchers who really understand this field. So Honestly, thank you for this opportunity. Even the hackathon itself was already enough for us, that participation, but everything afterwards has been just amazing.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I definitely didn't know that models of AI like Phlo existed before this opportunity. And I think that that's just so incredible and innovative. And I'm really thankful we got the opportunity to kind of try that out and get familiar with it. I can see it being extremely successful and allowing so many more people to pursue their dream careers and their startups. And I just really want to say thank you for allowing us to come on here and talk about it and our project and sort of just everything about this hackathon. It's been a great experience.
Amazing, guys. Thank you so much. And that's a wrap on today's episode of Proof of DeSci. Huge thanks once again to Caroline and Eshwar for sharing their journey, insights, and the story behind their Pearlfect Millet. It's inspiring to see the next generation of researchers and students using tools like Phlo to accelerate real-world impact in the intersection of AI and biotech. And guys, remember, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, follow us, leave a comment, and share it with someone curious about the future of science. And don't forget, if you want to try Phlo yourself to get involved with ValiDAO, head to validao.bio and join our community on Discord. This podcast, Proof of DeSci, is also available on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, and on all the major podcast streaming platforms. So guys, thank you once again. And until next time, stay curious, stay collaborative, and keep building science that matters. Thank you so much.